Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here today because Judge Ann Donnelly has finally decided to respond to the defense's motion for release, and for the third time she has denied the request. So I'm going to go ahead and read her response. It says, on May 1st, 2020, the defendant made his third request for temporary release. The defendant argues that he is entitled to bail because medical tests demonstrate that he is likely diabetic. Raising most of the same arguments pressed in his previous applications, the defendant continues to contest the court's findings, and presumably the same findings by other courts, that, quote, no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure his appearance as required and the safety of any other person and the community. The government opposes. For the reasons that follow, the defendant's motion is denied. And then they go back to the 3142 United States Code number 18 that they always cite in his cases. And so it says, permits a district court to order pretrial detention if it concludes that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the appearance of the person as required and the safety of any other person and the community. When a defendant has been charged with a qualifying crime involving a minor, as the defendant has, there is a rebuttal presumption of pretrial detention under Section 3142E3. The defendant has been charged in this district with violating 18 U.S.C. 2251, 2451, 2422, and 2423, and in the Northern District of Illinois with violating 2251, 2422, and 2252A. And it goes on to say, all of which are qualifying crimes involving a minor. Therefore, there is rebuttal presumption of pretrial detention. The defendant, quote, bears a limited burden of production, not a burden of persuasion, to rebut that presumption by coming forward with evidence that he does not pose a danger to the community or a risk of flight. United States versus English, United States versus Mercedes. Quote, once a defendant has met his burden of production relating to these two factors, the presumption favoring detention does not disappear entirely, but remains a factor to be considered among those weighed by the district court. Even, quote, even in a presumption case, the government retains the ultimate burden of persuasion by clear and convincing evidence that the defendant presents a danger to the community, and by the lesser standard of a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant presents a risk of flight. So basically what she's saying here is that it doesn't matter what they come up with. She is not letting, she's not granting their motion for release, because like, what do you produce that guarantees that you're not a flight risk? I mean, they have his driver's license, they have his passport, they have he has the bond in the Cook County case. He has, they have recommended the anchor monitor. I mean, other than having a U.S. Marshal sitting in the apartment with him 24/7, what else can he do to produce evidence or, whatever it is that they're looking for that he won't flee? So I'm reading this as, no matter what you guys come up with, we're not letting him go, so leave us alone. So then it goes on to say, as relevant here, temporary release of a defendant is governed by United States Code 3142, which permits a court to order temporary release for a compelling reason. In this case, the defendant must rebut the statutory presumption of pretrial detention under Section 3142E3 or show that a, quote, compelling reason, end quote, calls for his release under Section 3142I. The defendant has done neither. And then it says 1. Release under Section 3142E. In determining whether a defendant has rebutted the presumption that he is dangerous and a flight risk, a court is obligated to consider certain factors, including the nature of the charges against the defendant, the weight of the evidence against him, his history and characteristics, and the extent to which his release would pose a risk to any person or the community. And then 3142G, see also Mercedes. The district court considers the Section 3142G factors. T, to determine whether the presumption of dangerousness and flight are rebutted. Both indictments charge the defendant with serious crimes that span years. In this district, the indictment charges that for almost 24 years, the defendant led an enterprise, the purpose of which were to promote the defendant's music, to recruit women and girls to engage in illegal sexual activity with the defendant, and to produce child pornography. In the Northern District of Illinois, the defendant is charged with participating in a long-running conspiracy to obstruct justice and a conspiracy to receive child pornography. In connection with the obstruction charge, the defendant is alleged to have secured witness silence and in at least one instance to have suborned perjury through bribes, blackmail, threats, and intimidation. This conduct strikes at the heart of the integrity of the trial process and, quote, has been a traditional ground for pretrial detention by the courts. United States versus LaFontaine. In Gotti, we had that a single incident of witness tampering constituted a, quote, threat to the integrity of the trial process, rather than more generally a danger to the community, and was sufficient to revoke bail. Quoting United States versus Gotti. The defendant takes issue with the court consideration of the charges in evaluating his dangerousness and risk of flight, ECF number 63 at 5. Quote, what is more troubling from the defense's perspective is that this court accepts the allegations regarding obstruction as true and as evidence that he would obstruct now if released, but completely discounts the factual and historical evidence of appearance. However, and that's an end quote. However, because, quote, an indictment returned by a proper grand jury conclusively determines the existence of probable cause, Cayley versus United States, a court does not unfairly skew things against a defendant when it takes the charges into account, nor does it mean that a judge is simply accepting the government's position without critical analysis, as the defense argues. The other judges who have considered the question of bail, the Honorable Harry D. Lyon-Weber, United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois, where the defendant is currently being held, and Magistrate Judge Stephen Tission, to whom the defendant made his first application for bail in this district, also found that the defendant was a flight risk and a danger to the community. Judge Lennon Weber characterized the charges against the defendant as, quote, extraordinarily serious, end quote, and emphasized the obstruction of justice charge. As far as the obstruction of justice, according to the specific count in the indictment, that the acquittal was at least in some part obtained because of obstruction of justice, which involved allegedly paying off of witness and threatening witnesses and buying back certain evidence in the forms of the videos. According to the indictment, again, I go by the fact that a grand jury found that there's probable cause, that witnesses were paid and witnesses were threatened in order to either change testimony or not appear at all. So it appears to me that the defendant has failed to overcome the presumption of requiring detention in both the case here in Chicago and the case in New York. United States versus Kelly. And so she's reading from a motion that they filed in the Chicago case, and I believe that was back in September or October. And so then it goes on to say Judge Tission likewise denied bail because the defendant posed a risk of flight and dangerousness. Judge Tission observed that the defendant faced, quote, incredibly serious charges of sexual abuse of minors, coercion of minors, and child pornography, end quote, and that the defendant, quote, has a history of similar allegations dating back more than a decade. Judge Tission was, quote, extremely troubled by the issues of potential obstruction in prior cases, end quote, and the, quote, strong possibility that there could be potential witness tampering in this case if he's released, end quote. In an effort to rebut the presumption of detention, the defendant cites, as he has before, his history of returning to court in the 2008 Illinois State Court case. The significance of that record is substantially undermined by the grand jury's probable cause finding in the Illinois federal case that the defendant obstructed justice during that trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges, but as explained above, the grand jury's probable cause finding that he obstructed justice in the past, as well as the nature of the other charges, are relevant factors in the pretrial detention analysis under Section 3142. See Cali 571 U.S. at 329. Quote, the grand jury's unreviewed findings similarly may play a significant role in determining a defendant's eligibility for release before trial under the Bail Reform Act of 1984. Nor are the, and that's end quote, nor are the defendant's proposed measures that he be kept on home confinement and monitored by pretrial services sufficient to eliminate the danger to the community. These measures can be circumvented by the wonders of science and the sophisticated electronic technology, and the monitoring equipment can be rendered inoperative. United States versus Arena. Without the, quote, confidence of security, end quote, assured by a detention facility, United States versus Milan, the danger of the community cannot be eliminated, especially where, as here, the proposed measures are powerless to stop a defendant from inducing others to interfere with witnesses. See United States versus Chaudhry. Quote, it is well established that home detention and electronic monitoring may be insufficient to protect the community against dangerous individuals, particularly where those individuals have the ability to command others to do their bidding. See also United States versus Sindon. Quote, the stakes in the criminal case are high, and temptations of perjury, subordination, and intimidation are ever present. End quote. The circumstances that led Judge Weinenweber, Judge Tission, and me to conclude that the defendant has not rebutted the presumption of detention have not changed. The defendant is charged in Illinois and New York with extraordinarily serious crimes for which he faces a long prison term if convicted. The prospect makes him a flight risk. The nature of the charges, which include crimes against minor victims, threats against potential witnesses, and paying bribes to keep witnesses from cooperating, make him a danger to the community, including that he could attempt to tamper with prospective witnesses. For these reasons, the government sustained its burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that the defendant poses a danger to the community, and by a preponderance that he be a flight risk. There are no conditions or a combination of conditions that, quote, will reasonably assure the appearance of the defendant as required and the safety of any other person and the community. 2. Temporary release under Section 3142I. As he did in a previous application, the defendant cites the global coronavirus pandemic as a compelling reason justifying his release. In my prior rulings, I have found that the defendant has not presented compelling reasons for his release under Section 3142I, in part because he is not uniquely at risk for contracting severe illness from COVID-19. The defendant argues that he is now uniquely at risk because he has been diagnosed as pre-diabetic. I do not agree with the diagnosis of pre-diabetes presents a compelling reason for the defendant's release. While the CDC has identified diabetes as a risk factor for COVID-19, the same is not true for pre-diabetes, a condition that affects nearly 1 in 3 American adults. And then it says, see, quote, groups at higher risk for severe illness, end quote. And then it gives the website address for the CDC. Then it goes, my review of the defendant's medical records reflect that he is receiving more than adequate care to manage his condition. The healthcare professionals at the MCC see him regularly and are working with him to implement lifestyle changes so that his condition improves. Those recommendations include diet, weight loss, and exercise. Section 3142I, quote, has been used sparingly to permit a defendant's release where, for example, he is suffering from a terminal illness or serious injuries, United States versus Hamilton. The defendant's diagnosis of prediabetes, a relatively common and treatable condition, is not a, quote, compelling reason, end quote, for his release. See United States versus Dortch. Finding no compelling reasons where a defendant has a prediabetes diagnosis but, quote, does not have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. He does not suffer from any pre-existing respiratory issues. He is young and his medical condition appears well managed throughout his pretrial detention. Conclusion. Accordingly, the defendant's motion for reconsideration of the court's pretrial detention orders and his motion for temporary release are denied. So ordered, Ann M. Donnelly, United States District Judge. So as I said earlier, no matter what they present, they're not going to let him out. They need to now request for a speedy trial and get this thing moving, because at the rate they're going, this thing could be dragged out for years, really, at the rate that they're going. And then there was an article on a blog, a news blog website. Don't know how much credence we should give to it, but basically said that they are offering him a plea deal of 3 to 5 years, and he would have to register as a level 3 sex offender, and that he turned it down. The article didn't say if it was which jurisdiction was offering that plea deal or if it included all the cases. And then they claimed that the person that they were talking to who's close to the case said that they believe that, R. Kelly could walk on all of these charges. But like I said, it didn't say, if he took this plea deal, if it would wipe away all the charges in all the jurisdictions, or if that was just coming from one of the jurisdictions. I'm a firm believer, but I've never been arrested before. But I believe that if I was ever arrested and charged with something of which I don't believe that I did, I don't think that I would plead guilty to it. I mean, it's just something about integrity. It's something about, having faith that God is going to see you through, that I just would not take a plea deal. And that's what they do. That's basically, people love to brag about, the feds have a 95% success rate. They got a 97% success rate. Well, that rate is so high because they get people to plead out to charges to, expedite the situation. They, have already sat in jail for 2 or 3 years waiting on trial. And then they give them a deal saying, okay, well, 5 years. And then they think, okay, well, I can do 2 more years because I already did 3 years and be done with this. Whereas if I go to trial, I could be facing 10 or 20 years. So I'm going to go ahead and take this plea deal. And so that's basically what they're trying to get R. Kelly to do. And then in another unrelated, well, kind of related, I noticed that Judge Donnelly did not address anything in the Steve Greenberg's amendment to his motion regarding Jane Doe number 5, Miss Azrael Clary, who's out here doing videos and carrying on, acting the fool, cutting up clothes and stuff. And so she didn't even address that, didn't even mention that anywhere in this motion. So I thought that was interesting, but even more so, Azrael came out the other night on IG Live and once again saying that, she's rethinking her life, and she doesn't want her YouTube to be used as a tell-all about R. Kelly, that she wants to really empower women. So she's going to stand down for a minute and reassess how she wants to tell her story, because she wants to really help people, and she don't want people coming on her channel, thinking they're getting juicy gossip about Mr. Kelly. And then she also said, I came in at the point where she said that she lost, something happened to her laptop and she lost all her files and all her records. And I don't know if she was referring to, if somebody had asked her, when was the music coming out, and she said she lost all her music, or if they asked her when is the next video coming out, and she was saying that she had lost everything, all her evidence that she had saved up on this laptop. But whatever was on that laptop, she says she's lost it, and that has set her back, and that when she does come out to finish telling her story, she wants it to be focused on her experience and be a positive influence to women in the same situation or looking to come out of that situation, and she doesn't want it to be about bashing him. So guys, that's it for me. Yeah, I don't know. I think Greenberg may need to let it go at this point and start trying to file some motions on this discovery, and trying to get some of this evidence thrown out and these charges dismissed, and trying to push this thing to trial. And because at this point, he's just wasting time, and the judge doesn't seem to be budging in the case. And so it's like, okay, let's move your energy into another direction. So that's it for me. Let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and rate the video. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.